Our Highline Voices, 106.5 KQWZ LP FM. Connecting Highline and our region. Share your story. Our Highline Voices, history, cultural heritage, art, performances, contemporary, pop culture. We are very motivated to provide a vibrant community museum and authentic social gathering place. It truly takes a village to raise a museum. Despite the challenges, our daily inspiration is our eagerness to build a stronger and more connected community. This museum is from the community to the community. Our passion is for our visitors to have access to a broad spectrum of information sources and cultural perspectives. Our Highline Voices.
Hi everyone, this is Nancy from the Highline Heritage Museum and welcome back. Welcome back to another really cool interview. We have a very special guest. I do say that about everyone because everyone is super special to me. Everyone has a very unique story to share and something just to learn from. And so today we have Brian. I'm going to let him introduce himself. But before we go there, I just wanted to remind everyone why are we doing this work. This is an initiative for us to tell stories that are outside of the museum walls. We don't believe that the museum should only be the only space to share stories. We believe that we can connect with each other at all levels and that we are reaching to audiences that might have trouble coming to the museum. People with transportations, people who work 2 or 3 jobs, people who have disabilities issues. And so we believe that inclusion goes in many different ways, and the radio is an extension of that, those values and the reason why we're doing this interview. So, Brian, welcome to the wacky space and the radio and this at a museum. And I'm just going to let you introduce yourself, and then we'll take it from there. Are you ready?
I am ready, yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy, for having me on. We've known each other for a lot of years, so I'm happy to be here and in conversation with you. I'm Brian Carter. I'm the executive director at For Culture, which is King County's cultural funding agency. Before I got into the business of grant making and artist commissions, I worked in museums for about 16 years, which is how you, Nancy, and I, how we got to know each other. So starting out helping to start the Northwest African American Museum, and then moving to some other institutions like the Oregon Historical Society, Burke Museum of Natural History. So a lot of my background is working in museums and a lot of time working to support and help grow Black museums movement here locally and around the country.
Nice. So yes, you're right. We've known each other for, gosh, I don't know how many years now. And I think that is really cool that it was way before you started work at For Culture.
Yeah.
And so you really understand what the museum work is about. It's not that you just know the general idea, the concept, like you actually have done the work and know what it takes to do this. I mean, you've been a director too, and so you know the pains of this position as well. And so now I think that that's one of the areas that I truly enjoy knowing you is just how much we share, but then also how much we have to learn. And I've been learning a lot from you throughout the years. And so it's been really cool.
Same. I think we're similar in that I don't think either of us grew up, going to museums and feeling like museums were places for us or safe spaces for us to explore. And more than anything, that there wasn't a lot of what looked and felt or sounded like us in museums. So that's why I think we've always had a strong friendship and a professional bond, is that so many people, they love museums, everything about museums. They went to museums when they were younger and everything about them is fantastic. And that's not how I entered the field. I entered the field because I thought there were some real issues with who was represented, who actually got to go, who knew that they existed and were for them. And so much of my work in the museum field, and even now through funding, right, is to try and make museums and cultural organizations more approachable, more accessible. And I think a lot of that is people like yourself who realize that the narrative of museums has to change, the content, the programming, who's on boards, who's on, right, who the curators are, who gets to decide on content and interpretation. So I feel like we're kindred spirits that way. Like there's a change that's necessary if we want museums to be a reflection of this entire American source community, which I think is everybody's goal. I just think it's a new day in museums.
Absolutely. And I think that throughout the years, we've been having a lot of conversations about that. And from my perspective as an immigrant, I think it takes it from a different angle too, because it's also comes from the area of minority groups just don't trust museums. And that's the same reason why they don't trust museums. Well, I've been researching that for more than 20 years. So there's very specific factors. But one of them is that it's just they don't see themselves in the museums. They don't see themselves being able to participate and feel comfortable and welcome and to actually be part of it. And so we are the first, and it is to me, it's a statement. We are the first generation of actually going through um, those demographic changes in the field, and then also being able to serve those communities. And then I shared that before, that we are no LA, we are no New York, we are no Miami, where they have already many generations on adaptation, on serving the communities, and who are the heads of all those organizations. And so now we are a generation where we are going through the field and talk about those harsh topics for some people. For me, it's not harsh, because I think that also comes from a place of, hey, let's talk. Let's sit down and see how we can get it together. It's not about them and us and them. It's more about we want the same thing. How do we get it? How do we make it happen? But it's true that we need to have those conversations, and we need to not only have those conversations but act on them, and being able to really go into areas that nobody has gone through. And so, no, I agree with you. I'll try not to talk too much. You know me, I talk way too much. And so I need to like shush. And this is your space, and I'm going to let you to talk. So tell me more about who you are, in the sense of yeah, what is it that you do? What is your passions about? The
Sure.
field, the field that we are in. And it just, I don't know. I just know that I can ask you 100 questions because I know you, and then I just like, hey, this side will be interesting for him, and the other side will be fun to for everyone to see. But at the end, I do want you to share what you comfortable with. So go for it.
Sure. Yeah, I think a new day for museums, right? That we both want, and I think there are a lot of new leaders, especially leaders of color in the field, who want the same thing. And to me, the big umbrella that flies underneath is like, it's humanizing the museum field. There was this kind of extractive approach, right, where museums said, we're going to take your collections and we're going to keep those safe for you. We're going to take your stories and we're going to guard those. And there were just distancing aspects with the titles that we give ourselves within the museum field, right? Like, what in the world is a curator? You know, like, what does that word even mean? I don't think that's something that most people are familiar with, that they have trust in that. So part of it is like, and I love what you do at Highline. Like, if I go to Highline, and I mean, part of it's the size, right, of your organization, you're able to do this, but you're there. There's not a lot of distance. You're not in a back office. There aren't 4 levels, right, of people in between you and the public. Like, if one goes to the Highline Heritage Museum, you're going to see Nancy. She's going to greet you. She might give you a handshake or a hug and tell you that she's glad that you're there. And I think that's what has to happen. If you're a bigger museum, you just have the ability to scale that up. So for me, it's very important. I think the museum professionals bring their own humanity to the job. So for me, yeah, I work in museums. Now I work at a grant making organization, but there are these other components of me. Like, to me, the most important job that I have is as a father. I have 2 sons. They're 16 years old, Jonas Alexander, and my youngest son, Avery Brooks, who's 15 years old. I have learned more through that job of fatherhood and the stresses and the challenges and the wonderful moments than I ever have professionally. And when I was younger, I always thought, I got to separate that, like, leave the fatherhood at the door, you know, go into the museum. And the older I got and the longer I work in museums, and especially now, I realized, like, I've got to bring that full kind of complement of experiences and different hats that I wear. So fatherhood is definitely who I am. I'm also a son. My mom recently moved after my father passed away. She moved from Yakima to Bellevue, and now she and I have a very different relationship. This taught me so much about aging and grief and transition later in life that I try and bring to my work as well. And it's not all serious. Like, things I love to do on the side. I'm a woodworker. My grandfather was a woodworker and a carpenter. These are things that I got from my father. The both the skills and experiences and his actual tools. And I love to make things with my hands. I can't paint worth a damn or sculpt, but I love making furniture, and I love the act of making things that people need and making those gifts to others. And that to me is a way that I am not always at a remove, from my community, but I try and be a part of it. And that's kind of my creative output or contribution that I can do with my hands. So just a little bit about who I am, the human, outside of the job title I have.
I think that everything is intertwined. I don't believe there's a distinction between one or the other. There, at the end of the day, we are humans. At the end of the day, we got more similarities than differences with each other. And at the end of the day, we are great. We are heading in the same direction. We want to feel that we belong. We want to feel that somebody's listening to us and understanding us. And we want to feel like somebody's seeing us. And we also want to cherish our past, acknowledge our traditions, and seeing, okay, what was happening today? How can we do this, do that, and then looking in the future, what are we expecting in the future? And so I really believe we have way more similarities than differences. But then also honoring those differences, it makes us rich. It's like spices to me. Everything is food to me. And so I'm always thinking of food. So I'm thinking of all the spices in a meal and how rich that makes it and how colorful that is, and just having this beautiful buffet in front of you. And it's just a beautiful thing to truly just live life deeper. I don't swim in shallow waters, and I think I shared that with you before. So it's just go a little deeper in the passion of really going into that human aspect of who we are. I think that you as a father, you understand from the kid's perspective how essential that is to serve children. I think you see from a son perspective how important it is to save the traditions from your family and preserve those stories. I think as an individual, you understand the permission that you have in expressing yourself and creating something beautiful out of wood. And that all those elements are being addressed in the cultural sector. And so I think that I don't see barriers, and that's me, obviously, and I'm a little wacky, but I don't see those boxes. I see as a really, I keep telling people that my Mexican label is this, that what I am, I'm just a full mosaic, full of many pieces, all the way from my, gender, age, sexual orientation, and religious beliefs, and motherhood, and everything that makes me. And so we all have the same capacity of just showing one title. And at the end of the day, we're humans. And so, like, for example, I was talking today to this guy who were looking into it's really cool projects, and I feel the joy. There's this spark. I feel that, oh yeah, that is awesome. And it's almost like, am I choosing this because it's a hobby to me, or because I'm really intrigued, or do I choose this because maybe it's potentially people that are interested in it? But it's a pleasure to see that people respond the same way. We're talking about food, and so like, yes, this is cool, and do a project with food. And anyway, so the work that you do as your full culture hat.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's scary for me to know that you're in that position, because I know that you have a lot of different layers that you have to tap in. And and but then the other side is also really cool, because then that means that you're really going to be pushing those lines of, okay, how do we grow? How do we evolve? How do we move forward? And what is the narrative of that growth? And so it's I don't know. I think that I see us in the cultural sector, in our first generation of minority groups taking some leadership roles in, okay, we're doing it together somehow, and then have the humbleness to say, okay, we're doing it, but then we also have a lot to learn. And then it's just, how do we go through those battles and fights to survive, not only individualistic, not only as an institution, but as a community, as a region? How do we support each other? So
Yeah, over the
the
past 20 years, I mean, we had talked about this a couple of weeks back, is that when I first moved to Seattle and I looked around to see who was leading museums, or just cultural organization, right? Theaters, zoos. And I just didn't see a lot of folks of color. Over the past 15 to 20 years, you've seen a real change. I think that change is not reflected, right, in the the number of folks of color who are leading philanthropic organizations, people that are working as program managers or grant managers. There's a lot of necessary evolution and growth within those rooms where choices about who is supported and what work is supported. And that's what really brought me to For Culture. Is I had spent so long working in the museum field, and I felt like it was a battle. If I had an idea at a museum that was a little out of the box or unorthodox or didn't have a proven track record of being revenue positive, which, as you know, is often what's a necessary first step if you want to get a new audience, a new particular segment of the community into the museum. There's some risk to it, and you might not make as much money off of it. You might not sell as many memberships, get as many people paying at the door, but that's what museums owe. And when I was working in museums, and I would, throw out these ideas, which I didn't think were outlandish. I thought they were necessary to increase accessibility and to create an inclusive environment. I would often be met with, folks in development who said, that's a little risky for our funders. I'm not sure if, right, the donors are going to go along with that. And the more I heard that over my career, and that's not at one particular place, that's in a lot of different rooms, I just started to ask myself, like, well, who are these funders? Like, who gets to decide kind of what the values are of an organization that either grants or gives dollars or supports museums, and who gets a seat at the table to help shift those values such that these more radical, inclusive ideas of museum practice can actually come to fruition? And that's how I ended up at For Culture. Like, that was my question, is if we want to look at the systems of funding and trying to ensure that those are both accessible, which is important, right? That people know that those dollars are available. They feel like those dollars are for them. Those are crucial. But to me, what's even more important is that there were equitable outcomes. So the fact that BIPOC-led and serving museums have fared so poorly at the philanthropic trough for decades and decades and decades, you can do as many trainings and changes, but unless there's that kind of shift in funding, it does not allow museums to hire, I think, more progressive minds with ideas for museums that are different than what folks have seen in the past. So I feel like that's so much of my work at For Culture. Like, I don't get to decide Museum X gets money and Museum Y doesn't. My job as executive director is to try and create a system, an organization of 35 people, 15 board members, 4 advisory committees, right, that create a system of funding that ends with equitable outcomes. And that requires, right, like our processes to be different. It requires the voices that are on our board, that are on our staff, that are on our advisory committees to represent a broader swath of the population of King County. And that's been a lot of work, right? Like, to try and change who gets a seat at the table to dictate the creation of a new, more equitable system. But that's the work that drew me to For Culture, and that's what I'm trying to do now. And we get this great opportunity with the Doors Open levy of this huge infusion of additional dollars. So for those of you listening in, For Culture, typically through grants and commissions, is able to get about, depending on the year and tax collection, about $10 to $15 million out into the cultural sector. The Doors Open levy, put forward by the King County Executive and recently approved by the King County Council, puts an additional $100 million a year, right, annually in For Culture's coffers to distribute to arts and culture museums and theaters and libraries and science organizations, science nonprofits around the county. So I'm really excited about the work that we've done and how these additional funds are amplification, right, of both those equitable processes and, much more importantly, equitable funding distribution outcomes.
Yeah, and I think that us in the South End, like, we are not in Seattle, and it's just always been interesting to see the dynamic outside of the Seattle area and how it gets the funding and all that. Yes, it is exciting that we have a new chapter that we are heading into, and new challenges and new lessons to learn, and a new, and I think that, once again, I might overuse this term, but it's just being humble enough to say, okay, I don't know have all the answers, but we have a team who is dedicated, either in your staff or your board or the committees. They all have the mindset of how do we make this happen, and it is those values that are what unifies everyone. Is, okay, this is why we're doing the work, and how do we actually not just dream about it but implement it in an everyday basis. And so when it comes to you comment on that I've been in the field close to 20 years in the same thing, hearing the same arguments. Well, how do you save the Latino community if we don't have translators? And that absolutely drives me crazy because I'm telling them, I'm looking around me, like, I don't see an interpreter. Do you? You're talking to an immigrant right now. You're not talking to like first generation or second generation American. You're talking to an immigrant, and I don't see any interpreter next to me. And so don't say that somebody has to, you had to hire an interpreter to actually do your work or to actually serve the community. There's many ways. And so from that angle is yes, the last time we were talking about this was with Gabby at the Burke Museum. She's from Mexico City as well. So we do have, we connect a lot in many different areas, but it's the same language. How do we bring to the table a conversation that is not about them and us and them? It's more about, okay, this is a round table, which always is an analogy that I'll always love to use. This is a round table where nobody's in the head, is everyone is equally be able to share these voices. And so how do we, like, and I'll be honest, like in this institution, there are moments where people have told me that I'm not Mexican enough because I don't do enough Mexican or Latino events at the museum. And then we have other communities that tells me, well, you bring way too Mexican, you bring way too much social justice elements and Mexican stuff. And in either position, I'm pleasing anyone. I'm not pleasing anyone. Nobody's in agreement with me, maybe a few people, or some people might be curious about the work that we do, but it's really hard to constantly be trying to bring balance and be neutral enough to hear all the perspectives. Because it's not about, oh, this is my personal opinion. It's more about sitting down and, okay, what is it that you see behind me? Because no matter what, like in this conversation that we have in the two of you, you see what's behind me and I see what's behind you. And so it's, even though we're in the very exact moment in the same place, talking in a round table, you will never see what I see. And so you will never have experiences or the lessons, or you will never have the bias that we all carry in different ways and the scars and personalities. And so how do we regulate that? How do we sit down and really have an honest conversation as how do we serve people who have, low-income families? How do we do that? And so, yeah, I can spend hours talking about that.
I think like one of the things that draws me to museums, right? This question of how do you serve different interests in a community? How do you reflect the different perspectives and experiences that people have? I think museums are such a great vehicle to tackle that problem. I believe this in my heart, because museums are institutions. Part of the legacy of museums and them being such institutions, right? Like bedrock foundational elements of a particular community. Part of that is problematic, but what I try and do, or tried to do, and like conceptually is to trade on that. Museums, right, are ingrained, they're built in, they're part of a community, and that means that they will be there for some time. I always consider myself an institution builder. There is something about because I know what it's like in museums. You get calls every day. I want this show. I want that show. I want that program. I want this exhibition. I want this on the website. I want this in the collection. And museums have the ability, I think, to look not just at like the next 5 months, 6 months, or 1 year, but I mean, museums can look 10 to 12 years out. So I feel like an answer maybe to your question, at least my approach, is that I always try and manage expectations within museums. Like that was so much of my work of saying, I might not be able to do it in 2024. I might not be able to do it in 2025, but we're going to be here in 26. We're going to be here in 27. So let's start that relationship. Let's start getting to know each other. Let's maybe take a first step, which might be one piece from your family or from your particular community coming into this collection for the first time. Let's start getting you involved in some of the, whether it's working groups or advisory groups, or even just participating in some of the fun festivities like the food and drink and music that always happens at museums, and letting people know we're not going anywhere. And that's what I mean about like trading on the fact that museums are institutions, is that over the course of a museum's life, right, which typically is 50, 100, 200 years, you have the opportunity to share every story, right? Like you have that ability because you have time. It's different than other sectors, right? Where you've got 6 weeks or a month, and you've got to get it out there. You got to get it done. It's got to be profitable. It's got to pencil out. And those, like, you've got time in museums because of their nonprofit status and the ways in which communities continue to support them. So it's not easy. Everybody wants it today. They want it in their way. They want it to look or feel in a particular way. And it's just, I feel like with museums, it's often like, yes, I hear you. Yes, I want to be in relationship with you. And let's talk about 2 years from now, or let's talk about 12 months from now, whatever the timeline is, but you know you're going to be there.
Yeah, like for example, for us, I remember you coming to the museum way before even finishing the construction. And I remember talking to you, Brian. I don't know, I'm nervous even about the opening. And one of the first things that you said is you need to concentrate more on the actual, to be able to sustain and run the museum. Do you have a plan for that? And I was like, no, I cannot see ahead of me. I only see that I have this mountain on top of me, and I don't know if we can do it. And so but that advice hunt me from, since then. It's like, can we run it? Can we be sustainable? Can we survive? And sure enough, we finally did it. And then 6 months later, COVID hit. And so there's another type of surviving. Can we survive this? 1/3 of museums in America, I think, did not survive. And so the fact that somehow we did it when, within 6 months. And one of the issues that we have is under other funding agencies, we were not truly a museum because we did not have any track record of serving as a museum in less than a year. So we only were serving 6 months. And so with only one staff. And so when investing or giving grants or it was a gamble, just looking at us, because it's like, well, you just open, there's no track record, you are not serving the community yet, what is your proof? And the more no's we got, the more, I don't know, this almost like the fire just continued to, like, no, we will do it. It is like this big push, and it's not about pleasing people, but it's truly a surviving mode. It's like, we will do it. We know we have what it takes to survive this one way or another, without knowing how, but I knew that we were going to go through this. And the passion as to why are we doing this, and then looking at those kids. I remember that when through COVID, we hosted several educational field trips here from parents and groups that they were not associated with schools. And then receiving those letters from little kids, and it's just an amazing feeling. Oh, giving tours in Spanish to people that had never been to a museum before, and how can I explain to them, like, next time you go to a museum, you might feel that you are not welcome. You might feel that you cannot talk frankly. You might think that you should be taking the blame of, it's you who doesn't meet those standards. And in reality, and I'm telling them in Spanish, like, if you go to an institution that you don't feel like yourself, it's not your fault. That is the institution, because they should be serving their community. That's their fault. That you never ever take the blame going into a space that's supposed to be open for everyone, and you feel like you are not welcome and that you are not part of it. And so that has been one of my biggest gratifications. But it's painful to receive a beautiful letter from a kid, really young kid, say, thank you for making us feel welcome and safe. Why is painful? Because that means that they have experienced the opposite. For them to write that from a little kid, to be able to recognize those terms, is because they have experienced the opposite. They have experienced the pain of being rejected, being the discrimination, or just not feeling welcome. But I mean, us as adults, we can handle it, like, we already got a lot of hits one way or another. But little ones that are just learning that, and then they are not welcome to spaces, it's a hard that I had a collection of letters and close to my desk, and it is just amazing to every time I'm hesitating something, look at it, but like, okay, that's the reason why we're doing it. And I know that you as a father, and you as many different positions that you have gone through, you understand that we need to serve those little ones as the next generation. They are the ones who are going to be sustaining their museums. They're going to be the ones who are going to be the next community leaders, and the next ones who are going to be providing the infrastructure for the next generation to come. And so, yeah.
And museums, they draw such cool people to them. they draw, I'm talking about the people who work in museums and dedicate their life, right, to museology, the study of museums and how they work and operating them. It's rare that people do it to get rich. It's rare that people do it because they want to be famous. Like, it's not a great vehicle for those two things. People do it because they're, like you said, there's something burning inside them that wants to see, I mean, just from a historical museum perspective, like some form of interpretation that they're not seeing. They want to share. They recognize the power of history in the past of making meaning today. But those people, like, they work tirelessly for not a lot of money. But the cool thing about museums is you get to feel those wins. I remember the Northwest African American Museum, longest days I've ever worked in my life, 14-hour days, 15-hour days, 100-hour weeks. Always trying to, make sure you make payroll for the next quarter and make sure everything stays on track because you're a small museum. You know what that's like. Like, you're always at the margins because you're undercapitalized. But on those days when a fourth grade, tour from Thurgood Marshall would come in and these kids are looking up at you, and I never felt like, I've got all the answers, right? I just felt like if I can inspire these little kids to feel that this place is somewhere they can come back, maybe not even for a tour, maybe it's a birthday party, maybe it's right, like a health event out front that we would have. But if they could feel in that moment that that was a safe space for them, that it could be a part of something that, I mean, it's not ever going to be like their grandma's house, but maybe they're not scared of it. And I thought, that's all I have to do. Like, all the systems change that I wanted to do and was always looking around. I felt like maybe that was the most important part, is like connecting one-on-one with somebody who's coming into a museum for the first time, right? Or a family coming in for the first time, and just changing that experience, that narrative for them. And I think that's what museums offer people. Those who work in museums, it gives you that chance, and that's gratifying. Like, that's a good day. When you feel like maybe somebody feels better about coming to another place like this. They go to a different city and they say, hey, I want to go check out that Black museum while I'm there, or the local historical society while I'm there. Like, that's a good day.
No. And what is cool is that the gratification extends at all levels. From my volunteers, for example, they want to give it back to the community and see them directly, to the community partnerships that they see that together we can create something cool. And then obviously our audience and community that are experiencing this. What is community is one of the hunting questions that I have. It's such a simple little question, but if you really dive it into, it's so complicated. What is community? And and a lot of people have come to me and said, well, you Mexican, so you are not going to be serving, you're going to be serving more minorities. And they're like, no. To me, ethnic, racially difference is one of many different options. And like, I want to connect with you because I'm a mom. I'm going to connect with you because we like the same music, because we know what it is to be, he and that. And so there's so many layers of all of us. And like, there was this fear that we won't be preserving pioneered life stories. And it's this fear that now that I'm looking forward, I'm looking in the present, but I might not acknowledge the past, or I might not acknowledge everyone. And it's like, no, the same treatment as a minority groups is the same treatment to everyone, because we all the same way. We are sharing the same space. Once again, we have more similarities and differences. And just trying to finding that balance between history and then just so and just to give you a little bit of context, Seattle was it was founded around 1850s. The south end of this Highline area was more in 1870s. You start seeing more immigration. I say immigration because a lot of immigrants from different parts of the planet came around this area to be one of the first residents or pioneer lives. So the majority of them were immigrants. And so we have this immigration taking place. It is not until World War II that the or Asian American communities go push away. And then almost at the same time, you start seeing the redlining implemented in the area. That's when you start really seeing that it was not such inclusion in the community at all. It was not the same thing. Well, every city, every community has their own interpretation and history with it. But in here, it was truly implemented. It was like a really clear way. And so the history, the stories that we have, we started to collect more of the minority groups after 1980s, because before that was no such thing. for a good chunk of time, like 40 to almost 50 years.
Right.
And so we're thinking about who is our community. Well, we need to think about that it's a true cultural shock that's taking place at all levels. The ones that have already, 4 or 5 generations in the place, and then this new migration taking place. So there's no any adaptation changes into that. And then obviously, me as an immigrant, as an example, just coming in very scared of going to a place I don't know how everything operates. And then it's just this really scary thing. We only got 9 more minutes, and I just want to make sure that I'm covering other areas. Is anything else? We already start tapping into redlining. We start tapping into, what it means to be, or what is a community. It's just serving peers or people that looks like you, or is truly tried to make sure that everyone across the board it has a fair share of the voice onto the table. So I guess my question is, 2 questions. One, you can share whatever you want to share that it was not mentioned before, or we can talk about what is community to you. So I'll leave it up to you.
Okay. I'll just make one point, because I feel like a lot of folks who are brought into museums, typically folks of color, younger folks who are brought into what have been historically kind of white led or white serving museums, are often tagged with kind of a charge that, oh, it's revisionist history, because you want to make it all about Black history, you want to make it all about Latinx history, or and I always say, for me, and I think this is the right way, is that it's not revisionist history, it's good history. You cannot separate, right, the experience of history by race or by gender or by geography or by ability or by sexuality, because this country, and the region that we live in, you always had those intersections, right, and you had those overlaps. So just from a history perspective, it's the full telling of an American story, right? Which requires all these different voices and perspectives to not just be presented, but to be grappled with. I always think great museums are always grappling with the challenges of the past. It is not fixed, right? Why this newspaper succeeded, why redlining occurred, why this particular neighborhood, it's never fixed. There are always variables in the study of history that reveal new facets and new elements that you're constantly studying. So for me, history is so exciting because you have all these different people from so many different backgrounds and experiences, and they were there at the time, and they were intersecting with each other, and they were helping shape that community that they lived in. And so when you show all these different perspectives in a museum in the present day, right, it's not, oh, we're being corrective and this is revisionist. Instead, it's just good history. And if that were the mark, right, of a history museum, is it good historical exploration and interpretation, it would take care of itself. You would have a more diverse, inclusive narrative, right, within exhibitions and public programs, because it's just good history. So sorry, I just wanted to touch on that. And then the communities are difficult. I'll just end with that. Community is difficult, very difficult to define. It's really an extension of one's identity. So I believe that people being able to self-identify is something that I put faith in. And people's definition of community is often an extension of how they self-identify. So it's constantly shifting and morphing and moving around on you. From a museum standpoint, I always define community as far as you can reach. And a lot of that is actually size of organization, it's capacity of organization, and it's the budget of an organization. And I think how far you can reach means, do you have the ability right now, right? Just as an example, the Highline Heritage Museum, to go conduct oral interviews in New York City? No, you don't. Right? You do not have that ability because of the size and capacity and budget. So that's probably not your community, right? But do you have the ability to conduct oral histories within, right, Burien, within the surrounding cities of Burien? The answer is yes. And I think then there is a responsibility to that community that you have the means to reach. So oftentimes it's geographic, but when you get larger, it still is like, do you have relationships in particular communities, right? Your reach is defined by the liaisons, the ambassadors, the people that are your entree points to those particular segments of a community. And if you have that ability, right, if you have that reach, you then have the responsibility to bring it into the museum. So that's always been my answer for community, is as far as you have the ability to reach.
Yeah, for us, our mission is really clear that we serve the people of Highline. We don't serve people of Seattle, Tacoma, or any other place, just in Highline, and that is what we do. So the mission defines that, but also community is, are you going to be only providing, like in my case, just direct services to a Latino community? And like, no, I'm also going to be looking at people with disabilities and sexual orientation and sexual identity, cultural identity, and in business sector, in political sector, in medical sectors. And I mean, it's like a little bit of all. And so to me, it has been an interesting journey, even ask people questions. It's almost like say, what is home to you? It's also one of those very simple questions, but you can go through so many different directions.
Right.
We've got 3 minutes left. Before we go, I just wanted to say thank you, Brian, for another cool, interesting conversation. This one went way too fast, and I hope it was not a lot of me talking. I hope it was. I really hope that you were the one talking mostly. If no, I apologize for that. It's always been a pleasure to hear you, to learn, to explore, to see what's up, and to know that we are not. There's so many people behind whatever we do. You and your position, you got such an amazing team for culture. You guys, if anyone from culture is watching right now, love you. You know that I love you dearly. I miss being with you. I really miss you guys. And then also in all cultural institutions around the region and in the county and even globally, it's just this passion for our museum. So thank you. Thank you for allowing us to do this quick interview. I hope it's not that, well, maybe it will be the last one. I don't know. We'll see.
I'll just say thank you for the invitation. I always enjoy talking with you. And anytime you want to have me back, I'll be happy to come. Thank you for the conversation.
No, thank you. So good night, everyone. And I hope that you have a wonderful evening after this. Okay. Bye.
Our Highline Voices, 106.5 KQWZ LP FM.
We envision ourselves sitting at a round table where no one is the leader and stories are heard respectfully, regardless of gender, age, sexual orientation, disabilities, or ethnicity. We want to embrace our differences and similarities. We are creating a place where visitors can connect with the stories and each other. Our mission is, we collect, preserve, and tell the stories of the Highline region and its people. We want to extend our mission outside the walls of the museum. Our Highline Voices represents us all, honoring our past, celebrating our present, and uniting to cultivate our future. This project allows us to reach out to demographics who might be unable to visit the museum. People with disabilities, low-income families, people who don't trust museums, and more. In partnership, we are launching a locally programmed new radio station at the museum, featuring recorded and live Highline's heritage, history, culture, arts, and more. Are you interested in sharing your story? Email director@highlinemuseum.org.